Two, Dome Theory, number 75, on the eve of Nets Cavaliers, the play-in tournament, getting underway in the NBA. I love it. It's a great new addition to this league. I made the last month or so here really fun. It put the Nets in a weird spot for much of the second half of this season as they floated around all those different seeds, and they end up settling in as number 7. This is a team that had massive aspirations coming in this year. In fact, I think they were the championship favorites coming into this season. It's been rocky. They've had a massive roster transformation, and despite it all, they are still a team that other franchises look like they're fearing going into this postseason. We got some Bucks and Celtics maneuvering at the top of the conference heading into this week, and now the Celtics do line up against them in that number 2 slot if the Nets win tonight. We have Ajayi Browne here. Been great following his coverage with Nets Daily as well as the Nets Wire live in Brooklyn throughout this season. Getting into it on the Brooklyn beat this year, Ajayi is, and it's great to have him here on Dome Theory today to talk about a ton of Nets stuff, Ajayi. It's been an interesting year to start covering this team, I'd assume.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's been hectic. It's actually more hectic than last year, and last year was pretty hectic. It's for
Really the
sure.
first 3 years. So let's
Right.
get into this ESPN piece. Nothing too revelatory today as it drops before this game. It's basically recounting everything we've seen happen in Brooklyn over the last 3 years here. That first season where Durant's hurt, Atkinson gets fired, and the roster completely transforms to start to suit these 3 new superstars, and one of them being DeAndre Jordan, who came in that year. It's year 2. Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, they get traded. All of a sudden, you consolidate even more around 3 stars in Harden, Irving, and Durant. You got the foot on the line. You got Harden's injury. You got all of that, and they lose round 2. This year, I think we're all still trying to pick up the pieces from another Harden trade over to Philadelphia. Really the craziest trade I've ever seen in all of sports. Mid-season, he picks up, leaves to Philadelphia. Ben Simmons comes into Brooklyn, and here we stand. Still waiting for a Ben Simmons return. Harden's in Philadelphia, and Kyrie is back full time. And this is really, piece by piece what this piece got into here. But the big thing, I guess everybody's kicking around most out of this one is James Harden's shape and the contentiousness that caused there in Brooklyn. We saw it. He didn't look like himself to start this year. He still doesn't look like himself in Philadelphia. I thought he looked on the heavy side with the Nets to start the year. He looks a little better physically now, but he wasn't operating at his usual level. And some people talked about the officiating with him. Some people talked about his shape and just, once the season went along, his level of, how much he was locked into the situation here. So a lot of different stuff thrown around in terms of what happened with Harden here. You were watching him game in and game out. What was your read on Harden as the season got
Uh,
going here?
I have three big reads on Harden. One, he doesn't show up for the big games. That's only for this season. Two, the officiating problems, like you mentioned, was a big issue because we didn't know what was a foul, what wasn't a foul for him to start the season. And three, it's just his chemistry with the rest of the team. Like we didn't know how he would look with KD and Kyrie at the same time because the big three only played about, I think, 8 games last season together. Well, the old big three, as
Yeah,
you could say.
16 by the end of it.
Yeah, so it was kind of all over the place. So I feel like that trade for Ben Simmons was needed to just shake things up a little more.
I thought so too, and I thought there'd be some clear benefits of it. We've seen them so far with Andre Drummond coming in, giving them a real interior presence. Seth Curry certainly I thought was the most underrated part of that trade, and
Yeah,
his
me too.
injury status going into this postseason's a big deal here. How has he looked to you so far since joining the team? Because he's going to
S-
be a swing guy for sure.
Seth Curry, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he brings what the team needs, what Joe Harris missing. He gives them that perimeter shooter that spreads the floor, and usually it gets kind of a lot. It gets crammed, it gets clogged when he's not playing. But when he's playing, the spacing is marvelous. KD has more space to operate. Kyrie has more space to operate on the half court set, and in transition, Seth Curry could even pull up from three and give teams another like problem to deal with in transition. So he gives the Nets more elements to work with for sure.
Yeah, and we've seen that they're number one in offense since this new group came together. There's obviously a massive impact in just Kevin Durant coming back alone from his injury, and those are sort of the things that have rocked this team this year. Durant's injury, the Harden situation, Simmons not playing since he arrived in Brooklyn, just a lot of different stuff. You just keep going through it all, and I think people look at it and say, "All right, if everything was together this year for this group, we can talk about all the turmoil and everything else. But if all of these players are just on the court right now, you'd be looking at a top seed in the East right now. But it hasn't been that perfect, and it's not going to be that perfect going into the postseason here. There's still a lot of different stuff to work out.
Yeah.
We'll get to the Simmons thing in a second, but do you think there's a legit reason for the Bucks of the world, for the Celtics of the world, for those teams at the top of the East to be, let's say, ducking or, trying to get out of that matchup or avoiding them? Like, all those teams are
Uh,
obviously going to say they're not doing it, but you did see some rest down the stretch run from Milwaukee and
mhm,
from Boston.
mhm. I feel like there should be a reason for teams to be ducking the Nets at this time because one, KD, the Nets were the first seed when before KD got hurt. So we already knew what they were capable of, even if Harden was there or not, because the role players were playing well. Bruce Brown, and
He's come on
now you
big time
have,
lately.
yeah, Nick Claxton coming on big too. So you have the whole team operating the way that they should be together as a whole. But now when you put together, I guess you can say, this new team, and you may get Ben Simmons in the first round too, that puts fear in other teams' heart. Like, oh shit, like, oh snap, like they're not even at full power yet. So once they get to full power with Ben Simmons giving what he gives defensively, wow, like just thinking about it actually scares me of what the Nets can be when they're at full power.
Yeah, and I guess the other factor that I throw in there is Kyrie, and this is something I've been
Yeah.
thinking about. You know, probably the last 2 days here is this topic of him getting acclimated to the full time status. He's in phenomenal shape. He's a guy who's always going to be ready to play, and he's shown that with a you know 50-point game and all the different other stuff he's done since rejoining the team here. But the record's kind of choppy. The defense has certainly been up and down since his return. And I've heard this conversation about like, all right, there's a acclimation that you need to do to being able to be an everyday player because he was in a situation there where it was one game a week, 2 games a week when he was only playing the road games, and he was fresh, he was ready to roll when those showed up. Now it's
Mhm.
playoff type schedule, games every other day, playoff intensity, minutes, all those different kind of things. Has that been something you've kind of seen him trying to acclimate to so far over the last, couple weeks here since he did go full time?
I've seen him adjusting a lot, well, especially with fasting, because I feel like that's had an effect on him adapting to, that being that full-time player. So I can't really give like a full analysis of what he can be when Ramadan is done. But considering all the circumstances right now, it's really hard to depict what um
It's a fair
he's
point
going
too.
through in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah,
Yeah, we've seen Ennis Cantor, others talk about how difficult that is, especially this time of year. Um,
yeah, for sure.
So they're the plans tonight, Cavaliers, Nets. I think everybody is essentially thinking that the Nets are going to breeze through this. Last I looked, 9.5 point favorites. The
Mhm.
Cavs, if Jared Allen was available, I think it's a different story. The Cavaliers were a different team
Way
before he
different
got
story.
injured. Yeah, and now he's not
Yeah.
going to play in this game. Evan Mobley's playing, but I'm not sure how healthy he is after an ankle injury a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago. Garland's playing at a high level. In fact, when we get to awards, he's on one of my ballots for one of those for sure. And they're tough. I think they'll be able to battle here. We certainly saw the Nets, the way they've played defense, have trouble putting anyone away. On Sunday against Indiana, that ended up being a battle right down to the final minutes there. But
Mhm.
it is hard to imagine Cleveland winning this. Now, with all this Celtics Nets talk we've done here at CLNS, I wouldn't be shocked if all of a sudden we're going, oh, it's Cavaliers Celtics. Throw all that stuff out. But it seems
Yeah.
like it's going to be Brooklyn tonight. What's your read on this game?
I feel like the Nets get away. tonight with a win, and it's going to be a toxic series between the Celtics and the Nets. All the toxicity, all the history that goes into this, it's going to get so toxic in TD Garden. And it will get toxic in Barclays Center too, because Barclays Center knows how to match TD Garden's energy in regards to the toxicity. I remember they threw a bottle at Kyrie last year. I was just like, wow, these Celtics fans do not play about their team at all, you know?
Yeah, and then you got Kyrie's comments about the scorn lover, whatever it was, and I know Kevin Durant has already sent out a tweet to our CEO here at CLNS
uh,
after he was adding him, and all that comes with it for sure. Plus the Ben Simmons
uh,
return, which is possible here. We might as well talk about that right
mm,
now. Oh yeah, I think we can all agree with that. Why he hasn't played for 82 games. Oop, you got me now?
oh yeah, it was lagging. Yeah.
Yeah, you asked me there, but Ben
Mm,
Simmons, sits for 82 games. Philadelphia, mental health stuff. Brooklyn, it's a
hmm
bad back. And now, Shams is starting to send those signals that he's going to be ready to go for the series. I don't know when it will be, probably later on. But
hmm
it looks like he's going to be a factor here somehow. And I don't know how that's going to look. Just getting his feet under him for games for the first time in a year, coming off a back injury here, playing with new teammates for the first time. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it beyond the fact that the last time we saw him last June, it was looking rough. 34% from the free throw
hmm
line, 2 shots in the fourth quarter, all that stuff we talk about when it comes to him. So just those like 3 factors with him floating over his head in the series, beyond the fact that it's playoff basketball for the first time, against a
hmm
team in the Celtics that just has some high level talent going back at him. I guess you could implement him in a smaller role into the series and have him be more of a complementary piece, which was the thinking the whole time in him coming to Brooklyn. But I'm sort of shocked that this is the spot that he and the team are looking at to insert him and, make his return.
hmm For sure. I see him making that role of being like a Bruce Brown with more passing ability because he knows how to set up other players on the half court set and in transition better than actually Durant and Kyrie at times. Not all the time, but at times. So if you just implement him in that sort of role, and like you said, it's kind of a mitigated role, then you never know what can happen. And defensively, I see him more matched up with Tatum, who is a monster offensively, who is really hard to contain. And I know last year he dropped almost 50, or it was 50, I think, in game four or
Game
game
three, yeah.
five, game three.
Mhm.
Yeah, so just seeing that, you already know Jason Tatum's ready to play if the Nets move on today.
Yeah, it needs a
And you guys
match.
have Jalen Brown.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're gonna need some perimeter guys because again, right now I just don't see on Brooklyn's end the defense that is needed to contain those guys. Not to mention other dangerous players like Al Horford, who's been getting rolling lately, Marcus Smart, who's had his shot. The later part of this season, I'm sure Brooklyn will try to direct a lot of shots his way, which is what teams have done
hmm
to try to get the ball out of Tatum and Brown's hands. But you need something at the point of attack against Tatum in particular. And last game, it was Kyrie a lot of the time. Like that was the matchup that the Celtics were hunting. And listen, Kyrie's got some
hmm
quick hands when he plays hard. I think he's a better defender than people think, but he's smaller. And a lot of the time, like he can just get blown by if he's not able to pick a guy's pocket.
Very
So
true.
they'll
Very
need
true.
Simmons in some kind of role. I agree on defense, but on
Right.
offense, I don't like. Is he gonna come off the bench? Like, is he gonna replace Bruce Brown in a starting lineup? Because I feel like on the offensive end, Brown's almost able to give you more right now than Simmons is,
Right.
especially in that role.
For sure. But they're lucky to have both as options
Yeah,
anyways. But do you think even with these two implemented that the Celtics are capable of outscoring the Nets?
I think we saw it in that last matchup, and we've seen it since Robert Williams
Mhm.
went down. That was a question, and that's obviously something that's looming over a potential series here too. Is his injury 4-week outlook? I think is what people are looking at. So that brings it to April 27th. Celtics are starting to send some signals here that he could maybe be back closer to the 3-week range, which would be next Wednesday. I think at least through game 4, game 5, there'll be no Rob in this series, and it's safe to assume that there'll be no Rob at all. So that's a change over
Hmm.
last game. Simmons
Okay.
being out there would be a change as well. But in terms of keeping up offensively, the way Tatum's scoring right now and facilitating out of double teams, they've been one of the best offenses in the league too. A top 5 assist rate since Rob went down. I believe the number 1 offense still right up there with Brooklyn over that
Hmm.
stretch of 6 games now. Now the competition wasn't great. I think Indiana's in there, and what was the last game? A Memphis team that sat everybody, and Milwaukee, and
Yeah.
there was a mix of some good teams and some bad teams down the stretch of the season there. I didn't get a full picture on what the Celtics look like overall as a team without Rob so far, but I do get a sense that the offense can keep functioning at a high level, especially against Brooklyn, because
Right.
in that game, it was a lot of going downhill against mismatches on the Brooklyn side. Seth Curry,
Hmm.
Kyrie, even Brooklyn's bigs, whether it was LaMarcus Aldridge and Nick Claxton, didn't do a great job containing Boston's wings. So this will be a shootout of a series if it happens for sure.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, I guess, what Kyrie you get, because Durant's going to put up
Mm.
his numbers. There's really no stopping him. Kyrie in that game struggled a little bit in spots, but that was a different Celtics defense that he was going against there too. They've
Hmm.
slipped a little bit since Rob went out. So a lot of
Right.
fascinating stuff has changed since these two teams last met.
For sure. For sure. And one of the biggest changes that I think will kind of affect this series is Kyrie fasting because I solely
You're big on
believe that.
that, huh?
Yeah, I solely believe that if you want to be fully prepared for a playoff series, that you should be eating. But it's not on me to tell him not what to do because, like I said, like this is his religion and stuff. So
Yeah.
you got to
if
do
we
what
were
you got to
t-
do, but it'll be hard.
if we were telling Kyrie how to best handle this season, that'd be another suggestion we could make too. But
Exactly, exactly, because we would not never win that battle
yeah.
at all.
It's really been something, and I didn't expect him to be back full time at this point, just off the way Eric Adams was talking about it. But they eventually did make that
Yeah.
exception, and that certainly changes the series as well. I believe the last time these teams met, it wasn't clear if he was going to be full time at this point. So
Mm.
there's a lot of interesting stuff going into this series. Now, in terms of fearing the Nets from a Boston perspective, I don't think scared is the right word. Um,
Mm.
you're not scared if you're one of the best teams in the NBA at this point in the season. It's gonna be hard though. Like I don't think anyone should
Mm.
be disillusioned about that. Like I remember going to
Right.
that game in Boston. I think it was late March, and Boston was playing the best basketball in the NBA at that point. Like their defense was unbreakable. The stuff they were doing with Rob off the ball as a rim protector was, revelatory, and it didn't look like anyone had an answer for it. But first 2 minutes of the game, Durant lines up Rob, kind of pumps the brakes on him and pulls up over him and splashes. Kyrie does the same to Horford, and that's kind of the key matchup is Boston switching defense against the isolation play of the Nets because they can all hit jump shots, they can all score in isolation, all those perimeter players there, and that's how you attack Boston is you kind of line them up one on one, and you go right at them. And now instead of Robert Williams, it's going to be Daniel Tice who fouls a lot, isn't as long as Rob. He's a good replacement option, but there are some defensive concerns with him that I can see. Now, from your perspective, going into a series against Boston, what do you think some of the keys would be on the Brooklyn side in terms of attacking from what you've seen from the Celtics this year?
For offensively attacking or defensively?
Yeah, either or. Like, what are some of the keys to the series you think in terms of Brooklyn being able to match up?
Focusing on Jalen Brown because he's an underrated player that doesn't get enough credit, and he'll give the Celtics something that they've been waiting for since last postseason.
And he wasn't
So
in that
keeping an
series
extra
last
eye.
year.
Exactly. He'll be more determined, more motivated to have a big game in one of those first three, maybe two games if the Nets face the Celtics. Then I would have another primary focus on the Celtics defense. So trying to find those matchups, hunt those out, and make sure that you get the part the most preferred offensive matchup possible on every possession. And then third, it would be Jason Tatum because we all know Jason Tatum's a bucket. He's been doing this since high school, and he's gonna find a way to get 30 plus in probably almost every game of this series if it does go down. So those would be the three big points for me.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it's going to come down to Brooklyn's defense, and that's a big conversation.
Mm,
Over the last month here, someone sent me this earlier, and it is interesting. The Nets have ranked number 9 in defense since March 12th. He's
not
sitting here on
bad.
April 12th. So not
Yeah,
bad. You're watching them game in and game out. I think there's a thought that a lot of their defense and their system as a whole here, this was written in that ESPN article too, is a little more finesse. They're not as
yeah.
locked in on that side of the ball. Nash, in 3 years under him, I think one of my biggest, or 2 years now, one of my biggest criticisms of him is defense and a defensive identity not being as much of a priority there. They were better into the playoffs last year, so I'm sure part of it's flipping a switch and these guys playing a little bit harder. But what's your read on Brooklyn's defense? Is that overrated, underrated in terms of what they're going to be here?
I feel like it's kind of overrated at this moment in time because if you look at the Nets schedule to end off the season, it was one of the softest schedules to end off
All
the
right.
season for any team. So their defensive rating was pretty high in those games. But when you look at Andre Drummond and his perimeter defense, it's not that good. When you look at Ben Simmons' absence just on the perimeter and in the interior, it makes Brooklyn's defense not whole. And then you just look at Seth Curry's defense in the interior and how he would be guarding Jason Tatum, saying like in the mid post area. It would be really hard to just get stops. But if they could just pick out a few stops every, let's say here and there at timely stops, they'll be just fine because they're capable of outscoring any team in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and it will be interesting because the Celtics defense obviously is great in turn. Like Horford's been a fine replacement for Rob in the interior there. They can do some drop. I'm sure we won't see as much of that against a shooting team like Brooklyn. So there'll be a lot
Mm,
of switching, and I'm sure Horford's going to have to step out and guard Durant a lot. Horford's going to have to guard Irving. That's really been his job all year, is just taking all those switches and guarding everybody on the court, and he's capable of it. And he's had a fantastic year. And
yeah,
it obviously looks key that they brought him in now, given that they've lost Rob here late in the season. Smart will probably be that point man on Kyrie. Tatum will guard Durant. And I think what's interesting about this matchup is that Durant didn't guard Tatum in that last game. And I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons for that. He can rotate over and help off some weaker offensive players. I'm sure they're saving him energy wise, given all he has to do on the offensive end of the court. So, you can't have him running every possession with Tatum too on defense. But that's what I'm
mm,
wondering is, do you start to see Durant on Tatum a little bit more? Because that's obviously a guy
right,
who I think, aside from Simmons, has the highest defensive ceiling on this team.
right. Perhaps in the fourth quarter, we'll see more of that because the fourth quarter is the most important quarter. If it goes down to the wire, I see Kevin Durant taking on that matchup and saying, "Hey, let me get Jason Tatum to finish off this game. If there's a winner of this game, it has to be between us. It will be between Tatum and Durant, and if not between those two, it will be between Kyrie and Jalen Brown. It will be between the stars."
Yeah, and like we were counting out like who were the 4 best players in the series on the Garden Report, and you start going down the line. Like I guess you have to give Durant the edge still over Tatum, despite Tatum's rise late this year. Like there's a
Mm,
pedigree there, and there's a production this season that you can't deny. Tatum would obviously be number 2, and then you get down to Brown and Irving. Does Irving still have that edge on Brown? Is Brown's gotten hot late this year? It's probably closer than people think. I still probably hand it to Irving by a little bit, but Jalen's closed that gap a little bit here.
yeah, he has. He has. He has made a huge jump
And who would
in
be
his game.
5th if we were counting out all the best players in the series?
Mm. If for either team, right?
Yeah.
If Ben Simmons is to play, then we can't ignore what he's been doing
All right.
when he
That's
has been
where I
on the
was getting
court.
at. Would it
Yeah,
be him? Would
defensive
it be
player of
Smart?
the day back then. Whew. But Smart is a great player for sure. Like with his improved 3-point shot over the years, he has become very dangerous as a player.
So, like, and listen, I know the deal here. Like, it's tough to cover the Nets. Like, they're tight to the vest.
Yeah.
Nash, Nash will listen. Like, you hate to say the L word, but Nash was lying when all that James Harden conversation was going on. Like, I remember being in that presser when
Uh-huh.
he said it was a Net Celtics game I was in Brooklyn for when he said we're not
Uh-huh.
going to make any moves at the deadline. James is staying, and sure enough, next day that trade goes through. So, like, I'm
Mm-mm.
sure there isn't a ton out there on Ben Simmons right now, but like, what do you know as far as like where he's at, what he's been doing in practice, like what to just expect from him? Because I don't think anyone
Mm-mm.
knows, and that's my biggest thing with him. Like, could he be the best play, the fifth best player on the floor in the series if he plays? If he's who he was before, there's a chance he could be like the fourth best player in this series, if he's putting up like those
Mm-hmm.
25, 10, and 10 kind of nights. But if he's marginalized, if he's not doing as much, and if he doesn't look great or that backs bother him or whatever else, all these different concerns we have with him are out there, he could be a
Mm-hmm.
non-factor or even a detriment in this series. So like there's two extremes here. I know there's always somewhere in the middle, but I'm just looking at these two extremes and saying like he could swing this series in the right direction or the wrong direction. And I'm sure there's a thinking of like, all right, he's going to be good to go if we're putting him out there at all. But no one knows. And they're not talking about it much, I'd imagine. And we're all just kind of sitting here waiting to see what it looks like.
Right. From what I've seen and all the practice videos that I've been seeing over the past couple of weeks, he looks really good, and his jumper is looking really good too. He's been working with Kyle Korver, who's one of the player development coaches for the Nets staff. He's got that improved jump shot coming in. So if he starts
You're
getting
gonna
his free
put
throws
you're gonna
in,
put your money on Ben Simmons' jump shot.
well, I don't see him shooting a ton of jump shots in the playoffs, but I see him shooting a lot of free throws because he'll be getting fouled a lot because there's not a lot of answers for him in the interior. So when you just throw in that and his passing ability, he'll be a problem. Like you said, he could be that fourth best player in the Nets Celtics series if the Nets were to move on today.
If he's who he is, or if he's who he
Yes,
was,
if
and it's just
you
it's just
exactly
it's just so hard to tell. I mean, we really haven't seen him in just about a year on an NBA court, and we can watch all
right.
the practice videos in the world. But until he puts on the uniform and he gets out of that cutoff and the shorts and that real practice get up he's got there, I just don't know what to expect. I really don't. And I've never been
Fair
a
enough.
huge, I've never been a massive Ben Simmons guy. Like I just
Hmm.
thought there were things that he could have done in Philadelphia to adapt better next to Embiid that just didn't work. Now, is an easier fit here in Brooklyn? For sure. Like, you just got to let Durant and Kyrie do their thing. And, he can just be sort of that guy who fits in where he gets in terms of passing and rolling. And, I love what you said about the Bruce Brown role. That's his sweet spot. If he
Hmm.
can embrace it, but he's going to have
Hmm.
to, and he's going to have to roll, and he's going to have to set good screens, and he's going to have to pass out of those positions. And those are really things we
Right.
just haven't seen him do before. What was he doing in
Right.
Philadelphia? He was bringing the ball up, or it was just standing on that dunker spot and just kind of being out there. So I don't
Right.
know. Like that, I'm
I
not going to
feel like
rule him out, but
yeah.
I'm skeptical.
Right. In that Sixers Hawks series, Ben wasn't as involved with the offense
Yeah.
as he should have though. But now that if he does, play down to that Bruce Brown role with the Nets, that's all fine when you're playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who are running the offense primarily. So he'll be getting more buckets than he did playing that mitigated role compared to Philly when they had to face a loaded Hawks team they ended up losing in game seven. So
Yeah, and we've seen it all with him. We've seen him at his worst. We've seen him at his best. So there's
yeah,
really like two outcomes that could effectively swing the series, and he probably would be the X factor. Could Rob come back and change some things? Sure,
we
but
hope.
again, like he's so far beyond what it seems like Simmons' outlook is here in terms of like what game they both return that you start to look at Simmons first in terms of like what's going to set the table in this series. But game
Yeah,
one, both of them probably will be out. Joe Harris obviously out for the season. It looks like Seth Curry's playing through that ankle, but it looks like he's going to be good. Then on the Celtics side, it looks like they're pretty healthy. Marcus Smart saying he's feeling the best he has in years, and going into a postseason. Horford got some rest late in the year, so that's going to be key for him. Tatum, Brown, both dealing with some knee soreness, but nothing too serious there. So both these groups effectively, and Goran Dragic as well, who you have to mention is back from COVID protocol. Both these teams effectively nearing full health heading into a series here. So this is going to be like Eastern Conference Finals level basketball in round one. I
Oh
was
yeah.
kind of looking forward to the Bucks-Nets rematch, but this is pretty close in terms of the level these two teams are going to be going at here.
Right. There's no cakewalk to the championship this season. Not this year.
Yeah.
Perhaps in past years, but this year, whoever wins deserves it.
Yeah, and whoever wins the series will be going on to a Milwaukee in terms of how the bracket lines up.
Whew.
Eastern Conference
Yeah.
Finals would be a Miami, a Philadelphia maybe if they get it together. So yeah, you're right. This path in the East is pretty daunting here, and that's why
Mhm.
listen, everybody's gonna say, we'll play who we play, and we're not worried about seeding and that different kind of stuff. Listen, the Celtics sat a game that effectively was going to decide the 2 seed between them and the Bucks last week. And the Bucks, listen, they sat everybody. They started Drew Holiday, had him foul once to get his incentive, and then he sat down in that game. So they were clearly ducking the 2 seed too. I don't think either team is off the hook in terms of what they were doing there. So
Yeah.
listen, there's a reason to be concerned about playing the Nets. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
You still
But
should probably beat them.
if anybody would want to play the Nets, I just knew it would be the Boston Celtics, if anything,
All right.
because they're ready. They're ready for this.
So here's
If
here's the
it
big
comes down to
question.
it.
It's prediction time. Who would you have in a series between these two?
With Ben coming back, I have to go with the Nets. I have to because Ben gives them everything they're missing. And with the addition of Andre Drummond with rebounding, which the Nets struggled with prior to the trade deadline, that's something that they'll easily handle when it comes to playing Boston. And with no Robert Williams, no Time Lord, it's gonna be tough. Even with Daniel Tice and Al Horford, it's gonna be a battle in the interior. It's gonna be a battle on the perimeter. And I feel like the Nets win every category except for turnovers because the Nets will be turning over the ball a lot.
Yeah, we did see that on
Yeah,
Sunday. And the
yeah.
Celtics are that disruptive defensively. They're still capable of switching all
Hmm.
5 positions. There'll
Right.
be stretches where I think they can hold the Nets offense down a little bit there, but I'm going with the Celtics. I think that I've seen the Celtics at their best this year. We saw them at their 18 and 21 worst
Hmm.
early in the season. And I think the defining line between those were when they were able to get their offense moving, swinging, hitting shots, all those different kind of things. That's when they looked at their best. When it was getting stagnant and they were playing in isolation and going one-on-one, that was when they were at their worst. And in terms of what the Nets have out there for defenders, Tatum's going to be able to get downhill. He's going to be able to get to the basket and he's going to be able to make some passes from there. So it does come down to shooting. This team's been all over the place as a shooting group all year. They have a lot of up and down shooters, whether it's Derek White, Smart, Horford's had a crazy up and down year. So a lot of it's going to come down to them for hitting shots. But in
Hmm.
terms of the movement and the activity offensively that they need to get those shots, I'm very confident that they can get those against Brooklyn. And it's a big reason I feel good about them in the series. I've never respected Brooklyn's defense. Even looking back on
Okay.
looking back at that Bucks series last year, everybody talks about the foot on the line and everybody talks about that moment. But the Nets really struggled to get stops on the Bucks that entire series.
Yeah.
And if they were fully loaded with the big 3, like you said, they're capable of outscoring everybody, but that group's gone. Harden's gone. Irving and Durant can still do a lot offensively, but that's different from Irving, Durant, and Harden. If it was those 3 in
Right.
this series, I'd be picking the Nets. But Simmons, at least offensively, it's not the same.
Right. They're gonna need Ben Simmons more for the defensive end, but in regards to the offensive spacing with Seth Curry, with Goran Dragic, with Bruce Brown hitting his threes now, the Nets are still capable of outscoring any team. And when I say any team, I mean any team in the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference, with KD and Kyrie running the offense primarily. So it
Mm-hmm.
will have to come down to Boston being ready to hit all their shots from the perimeter, to hit basically all their shots in the interior, getting to the free throw line, causing havoc defensively. They'll have to work for every possession against the Nets because it's going to be really, really difficult for them to do that and pull that off.
So Celtics or Nets. Celtics awaiting the winner of the Nets and the Cavaliers game tonight at 7. Game for now still going on. I know we want to send our thoughts and prayers to everybody who was involved in the shooting in Brooklyn today. 10 shot in the subway on 36th Street, not too far from where the Nets practice. Pretty ghastly scene. Really rough day for the city of New York. And I know a lot of the Nets out of practice, they're pretty shocked seeing it on television, just blocks from where they were at shoot around this morning. So seems like the game's going to still go on. Obviously, a pretty somber mood over it, and we'll see what happens there. But as far as um, just the day for New York, pretty rough one out there. So of course we're sending our prayers out to everybody. As far as I've seen last reports, no deaths, which is a miracle. But of course, Ajayi, native of Brooklyn, there, it's it's tough to watch, I'd imagine.
Yeah, for sure. There's always devastating things that happen around here, and we're just forced to kind of move on from them. But it's so hard to do that knowing that every day or every moment or every week something like this can happen because of the randomness of these attacks.
Yeah. So before we get you out of here, I do want to talk a little bit of words. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
that's they're getting thrown around. Everybody's debating them. It really does feel like one of the most contentious awards races we've ever seen, in the NBA, at least in my recent years covering it. The MVP one, people still making the cases for the field against Nikola Jokic, who I think has emerged as a pretty heavy favorite here, especially looking at some ballots that have dropped out. But the other ones, I think there really are some interesting races. Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year is like a hot 3-man
Hmm.
race at this point. Coach of the Year, a million different names. So I'm going to read off my ballot for the first time as we go along here. I'll take any thoughts
Okay.
you have on them as well. But in terms of MVP, I ended up going with Nikola Jokic. No surprise there.
Hmm.
Like just the weight he carried this year. I've never been the biggest Jokic guy in terms of comparing him to Giannis and Embiid and just the offensive and defensive weight that those two carry. But Jokic stepped up his defense big time this year too. Nuggets were top 10 on that end for a lot of the year. And I just look at the teammates he has, Will Barton, um, Jeff Green, Bones Highland and a rookie, Aaron Gordon, who's not always the most consistent offensively. Everybody wants to make a debate here, but I just don't see it. I had Giannis 2 in terms of just a phenomenal offensive and defensive year for him, carrying the Bucks the whole way through Brook Lopez injuries and other ones. Embiid's 3rd. I know a lot of people are going to be upset about that, but no knock on coming in 3rd in this race to me. I did position Tatum in 4th just in terms of his two-way impact as well. But if anyone had Devin Booker over him, I wouldn't have a huge problem just because of how good the Suns were this year. And I did end up having
Yeah.
Booker 5th. Who would be your MVP?
Well, before I go to that, I did have Tatum as being an MVP candidate at the beginning of the season because I knew he was going to go off like this because his game is crazy. It's so rare and so unique. But my MVP, it'll have to be Joel Embiid. He's the scoring champ. He played without one of his stars to start off the season. Tyrese Maxey wasn't predicted to make this jump in his game. And if you just look at the scoring for his team, everything has to work through him. Like every team that they face, they're just getting the ball to Joel Embiid in the post. He gets a lot of touches every game, similar to Jokic, but Embiid has the edge because they have more of a winning record to me because Jokic is doing everything in almost every category.
They do have a better record, but it's tighter than people think. I mean, what are we
Yeah.
talking? 51-48. So it's a 3-game
Yeah.
difference. I guess it might matter to some degree, but it's not a massive one. If we were talking about
Yeah.
a guy on the Suns, 60 wins, might be a
Yeah.
different story there, but I just can't get over the Nuggets, that roster. And I know the Sixers
Yeah.
haven't had the best one either, especially without Simmons early in the year, but still Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, there's enough there, I think, to get by. But man, Denver, like that team, if you took Jokic out, and the numbers do show this in terms of the on-off, they will drop by like 30 points for 100 possessions when he's off the floor. They die in that third quarter run without him every game. And
Yikes.
you just think of like the
Yes.
minutes and the load he's been handling too. Like, listen, I'm not saying Embiid's the stupidest choice in the world and that you're an idiot, but like,
Mm.
man, I've been so impressed by Jokic this year. Just looking up every night, back to
Right.
backs, 36, 13 rebounds, 8 assists. It's a monstrous season he's had. And obviously, I think it was the first 2,000, 1,500 season ever.
Right. And I still can't believe he topped his last season MVP
Unreal.
campaign and somehow topped it to make such a phenomenal year for himself this year.
With no Porter, no Jamal Murray.
No Jamal Murray. Wow.
Yeah. So,
Is it enough
again,
to get out the first round though against the Warriors?
it'll be a close series. Draymond Green's a tough matchup for him to go against, but I do think
Mm-hmm.
there's tough matchups on the Warriors end too in terms of being able to handle him. So,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, let me hold off on that one. I got to think
All
about
right.
that one. That's a tight
We'll
series.
see.
That's one of the toughest first
Yeah.
round series, I think. That was a tough draw for
Yeah.
the Warriors. Plus, Steph Curry's health is a big deal going into that one as well.
Yeah.
Um, Rookie of the year, I don't know how close of a tabs you've kept on that race, but you got Evan Mobley, you got Scotty Barnes, you got Cade Cunningham effectively in this one. Cade started super slow. Honestly, he was terrible to start this year coming off the ankle injury, but came on big time. I think his March, I want to say, was the best statistical month by a rookie since MJ. So he's got that
Wow.
going for him. Late charge, doing everything for Detroit. I think that's part of his argument as well. Scotty Barnes, obviously a two-way impact. Maybe the best player on the Raptors this year. I know Siakam's right up there too, but there's been games where he has led them in terms of passing, scoring, and defensively. And they obviously ended up being a 5 seed off his contributions this year. So Barnes has a strong case going into this, but my pick is Evan Mobley.
Ooh.
Defense, I don't think a rookie has impacted the defensive side of the ball, which was obviously the Cavaliers' calling card for much of the season since, like, I don't even know who you would point to in terms of like a rookie who came in and did all that right away on that end. I'd have to think about it. But you hear Kevin
Mm-hmm.
Garnett comparisons. Obviously, he's got the size, the length to impact that end. Offensively, he's come on big time second half of the season. And they were, a top 8 team effectively in the league for much of the start of the year before the injuries set into Ricky Rubio and Colin Sexton and,
Yeah.
others since Jared Allen, especially lately. They've really gone under since he got hurt. So Mobley, other rookies have been hotter later in the year. There's a recency bias in this award and a lot of awards, I would say. But if we're just looking at the whole of this season and who was the most impactful rookie the whole way, I think you got to go with Mobley.
Right. I mean, I go against that. I have to go with Scotty Barnes
All right.
because Scotty Barnes, they asked him for so much in just his first year, similar to Evan Mobley. It's definitely between these two. And he's helped them in transition. He's passing, he's scoring, he's rebounding. He's pretty much doing it all. And he's doing more than the projected rookies like Cade Cunningham or Jalen Green was supposed to do. Like no one thought Scotty Barnes was even going to get drafted that early in the draft. So for him to have this much of an impact, it shows me that he's ready for the league. He's ready for whatever comes next. And it'll have to be between him and Mobley for sure. But Mobley's defensive impact is far more better for sure. So if
We
they give it to Mobley, I wouldn't be mad.
Yeah, and listen, they've capsized a little bit late in the year, so he's opened the door for that
Right.
comeback by Barnes. And I'd say Barnes, is probably a slight favorite just looking at the voters' ballot so far and really what
Right.
the sentiment's been out there.
Right.
Just
In the
because,
stand.
again, I think what people focus on is what's happened lately. And Barnes, of all the three candidates, I think has the best case in terms of like the second half, last quarter of the season, what he's done. Listen, I love Toronto. Like he's transformed their system. He's allowed them to play the defense that they've been able to up there. And there's a lot of different
Right.
areas of the game that he impacts, especially from like initiating. And I think that's a big deal for a lot of people is being able to start the offense, get his own, and carry their offense. They do a lot of isolation up there, so he's been able to score on his own this year in a very impactful way. Cunningham's done that too. There were some games where I was just blown away by Cade, but defensively didn't cut it. The Pistons stunk all year. It's a little easier to put up numbers on a team that's bad. So no knock on him. I love him as a player, but I can't see him winning it. Barnes, Mobley, I don't think you can go wrong either way there, but I am going to go with Mobley.
Yeah.
So that one will be
Yeah.
very
Fair.
close. I'm very interested to see how that one shakes out. This one's
Mhm.
always tough. Most improved. So the easy answer is John Morant, right? Like he goes from 23-ish points a game to 30 points a game. And, that's the leap from being a good player to an MVP level player, and that takes the Grizzlies from the play-in to the 2 seed. So there's a case
Mhm.
there that improvement's the most impactful, and that's what I went with. Like, is he the
Right.
most improved player in the league? Like overall, I think you look at Tyrese Maxey in terms of points per game. You look at DeJounte Murray in terms of going
Yeah.
from
That's my
a
pick.
good player to a all-star, and the numbers I
Yeah.
think overall across the board jump the biggest for him. So he gets my
Right.
number 2 pick there. And
All
then I
right.
think Darius Garland's a conversation here too, stepping in a lead ball role. Second
Right.
half of the season, over 10 assists for a lot of the stretch, and effectively doing everything for a Cavaliers offense that didn't have a lot of threats for much of this year in terms of shooters and scorers. So Garland
Mhm.
is my third. Wouldn't be mad if anyone voted him first. Wouldn't be mad if anyone voted Murray first, and that's what you did.
Yeah. My pick is DeJounte Murray. He led the franchise in most triple doubles in a season. Like you said, he's an all-star. He's having an increased role and he's putting up big numbers for a franchise that just snuck into the play-in tournament. So I'm
That's a
giving
big
him the edge.
accomplishment too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean they effectively tanked the trade deadline, trading away. Thad Young wasn't a big impact, but that's a selling move. Giving up Derek
Right.
White, for future considerations. Josh Richardson helped them a little bit, but they were heading toward the lottery at the trade deadline, and he lifted them back up to the playoffs over the Lakers, which
Yeah.
isn't a big accomplishment, but
Yeah.
um, they took advantage of it. So
Yeah,
Murray,
for
I would
sure.
love if he'd win that award. Like
Mm.
he's one of my favorite young players in this league. There was a dream of a lot of Celtics fans for a long time to go out there and get him when he was more unsung, but he's untouchable
Mm.
now. It's funny too, like when we
Yeah.
were talking about Ben Simmons packages, it was like, could you get Murray? And me and other people said, no way. Like, you would rather have Murray right now over Ben Simmons. I think that still has held true, since the Simmons trade
Wow.
went down. He's
Mhm.
amazing. The numbers are astounding. Coach of the year, I, I'm looking at the ballots that are out there so far from the voters, and it feels like Monty Williams is going to run away with this one, which I don't love. Monty's great. This is the 3-year process of turning that team from a dumpster fire to a championship favorite, I would say, this year, in terms
Mm.
of what their path's going to look like. So I don't think it'll be a disgrace if he wins, but in terms of like actually coaching and like scheming and lifting a team up, you got a lot of good cases with JB Bickerstaff of the Cavs, who has lost a lot of players this year, took what was expected to be a 26 win team to the play-in. Jason Kidd making a Mavericks defense that was pretty rough for a couple of years there under Luka Doncic into a top 5 unit. That's impressive to
Mm.
me. So he is third on my ballot. Eric Spoelstra getting awesome performances out of Omer Yurtseven and Gabe Vincent, Kyle Guy, Max Strus, making him a starter in this league. That's astounding coaching. But maybe I'm biased because I've been around him day in and day out. I went with Ime Udoka, the former Nets assistant and now Celtics rookie head coach, turning an 18 and
Mhm.
21 team into a 2 seed with 28 wins over
Very
their last
impressive.
35 games. Number one defense, number one offense since the trade deadline. I don't know how you pick anyone else. And you think of how he transformed Tatum's game, Brown's game,
Yeah.
making them both playmakers, turning Rob into a star on the defensive end of the court after he barely played last year. His impact from a coaching perspective is just unmatched to me this year.
Right. I have to go with Monty Williams. Only because of the wins and his impact since last season. Like I feel like he should have won last season because he turned the Phoenix Suns from a losing franchise that missed the playoffs to a franchise that
That's
made the
fair, but
playoffs to
is
actually
this
get to
like
the
the
finals.
Grammy career achievement award? Like
It should be. It should be. So they owe Monty Williams a coach of the year since last year. So they have to give it to him now because he has a winning record, the most wins in the NBA for the
who
regular
won
season.
last year?
They
I'm
got to
trying to
give it to
think.
him.
He should have won last year. I'm trying to think of who the coach of the year was last year. I'm gonna look it up real quick because I
Mhm.
agree with you there. He should have won last year. Tom Thibodeau took it, which
Yeah.
see how that went.
I don't understand. I don't. I really don't understand how, but
I'm not
it's
gonna give
whatever.
Monty the 2022. We're gonna take
Right.
Tibbs's 21 and give it to
Right.
Monty. That's how we're gonna handle this
Exactly.
one.
Because if
Um,
Monty won last season, this year would have went to Ime Udoka, Jason Kidd, or even JB Bickerstaff, like you said.
yeah. Um, let's six man of the year is easy, right? Do we all agree, Tyler
Yeah,
Hero?
Tyler Hero. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be unanimous.
Yep.
Kelly Oubre is floating around. Kevin Love was fine, but that is the only runaway award this year, I would say. That brings us to
Yeah.
Defensive Player of the Year award. By the way, Hero carrying that team for a lot of the year through injuries and stuff. Big credit to him.
Hmm.
I don't know how many Heat are going to get recognized for their first seeded season. Maybe Spoelstra does, maybe Jimmy Butler does in the All NBA side, but I'm glad Hero does because a one seed does deserve an award recipient. Defensive Player of the
Hmm.
Year. This is going to be the most tightly contested. I've seen votes for Rudy, Giannis, Bam, Mikal Bridges, as well as Marcus Smart so far. All first place votes for all of those guys on official ballots. My
Right.
ballot, it was tough. I actually thought Robert Williams would have been my pick from the Celtics for this one in terms of representing the number one defense in the league. He gets
Hmm.
hurt. I was eventually convinced to go with Marcus Smart just from the communication standpoint, defending five positions, among the steals leaders, among the loose ball recovered leaders, a lot of different statistical backings for him, but just in terms of the energy, the communicator, and the organizer of the number one defense in the league, I think that gives him the edge over Giannis, who was still great this year, but had to play a little more center. Their defense fell to the 20s at times, so I think you need to be a top 10 defense as a team to have a winner in this award. Draymond Green was probably the favorite for a while, but he missed a ton of games, so I can't give it to him. And Rudy, I'm not one of the Rudy haters. I respect his impact, so I do put him in at second or third here, just
Hmm.
because of the deterrence. And really, he held a heavy weight on that side of the ball this year because they have no
Hmm.
perimeter defenders there in Utah. So if he wins, I'm not going to be too upset. But I am going with Marcus Smart for this award because I think the number one defense in the league should have a winner, should have a representative here.
Right. Well, I respect your decision with choosing Marcus Smart. He is impressive defensively. That's why he's one of my worries if the Nets match up with the Celtics in the playoffs. But if I have to go with the defensive player of the year, I'm going with Rudy Gobert. I'm tired of him getting slept on too much. He
Come on, he's
literally
piled up these
he
awards.
anchors
Slept
the
on.
he anchors the interior like no other. He knows how to play help defense like no other. He blocks like no other in the league. There's literally nothing he can do defensively in the interior. And
All
yeah,
right.
you can say on the perimeter
Yeah,
it's
there we
kind of
go.
like tough for him, but his closeouts with just his length still forces some misses. So I have to give it to Rudy Gobert. He's the best defensive player in the league for sure.
And I,
So I'm giving it
I,
to him.
I get torn on that one because, like I said, I carry a team's defensive results heavily in my considerations there, but at the same time, like his impact was the only reason they were even in the race for a top 10 defensive spot. In the end, they ended up
Yeah.
10th. So they were a top 10 defense. He was a big reason for that. I'm not mad if he wins, but the Celtics were, 4 points better per 100 on that end. 106.2. They end up number one. Stinks that Rob couldn't really end up getting in the race here with that injury. It
Right.
doesn't feel like there's much momentum for him
Right.
because I do feel like he was the guy who took the Celtics defense to the next level. But
Right.
we'll
And
see.
paired
It'll be
up.
a tight one.
Yeah,
Mikal
paired
Bridges
up
getting
is just crazy.
votes is pretty astounding here too. I haven't watched a ton
Yeah.
of him on that side of the ball this year, but his versatility kind of speaks for itself. They've had a top 5 defense, top 10 throughout this season. I just feel like,
Right.
you got other perimeter defenders there. You have Ayton. It's more of I don't want to say it's more of a team system because obviously the Celtics
Yeah.
system is a
It's
team
true
system
though.
too, but
It's
um,
true. For
you
both
know,
situations.
yeah. So maybe that's a credit to Rudy as well. Listen, there's a bias against Rudy. Like there really is.
There is a bias against Rudy
No one wants to
because he's
give him
stacking them up.
no one wants to give him the credit he
Uh,
deserves. But I think
uh,
the voters will. Kevin O'Connor and others. I already see
yeah.
3 place votes for Rudy so far. 3 for Smart as well. And I think Bam Adebayo is
Mm.
getting a lot of love for first place with 3 votes as well. He
Oh
missed a
wow. So
ton
it's
of
gonna
games
be
though.
close.
Yeah, it's going to be
Yeah.
very close. There's so many names in this race this year. All NBA. So, like guards, you got to go with Luka, I would think, on that first team.
It's Stephen
Toss.
Curry.
Oh, you're going with Steph. Now, I
Yeah.
had Devin Booker.
Oh,
Monster
yeah. I'm taking
scoring
Steph out.
season. Yeah.
Actually, I'm putting Devin at the small forward, and then I'm putting Steph at one.
Now you can do that. That's the tricky thing about the All NBAs this year. I
Mm,
stayed very tight to the positions. I went Booker, Doncic, Tatum at the 3, who I think people would take off if they were including Embiid or Jokic, depending on which way you went at the center. You can vote for Embiid and Jokic this year together on a first team. I didn't do
mm.
it just because that's never been done. Like that.
Wow.
Bill Russell, Wilt, like they were first and second team guys. All those centers in the '90s, Shaq and Hakeem or whoever else. Like someone had to take second team back then. They got to figure out a
Mhm,
way to fix this because it's positionless basketball now. But
mhm.
I'm sticking with what the tradition is here. Picking one
I
center,
respect it.
picking a couple forwards, and for that reason, I went Jokic first team and Embiid second team. And my first team was
Mm,
Jokic, Giannis, Tatum, Doncic, Booker. I took Ja Morant off at the last second just because didn't have enough games, 56 games in the end.
mm.
So
Yeah.
he gets bumped down for me. But you would have went Steph first team still?
Yeah. Steph first. Then I'm going Luca. Then I'm going Devin Booker. I'm going Jokic and Embiid.
All right, so Tatum, Giannis get bumped down for you.
Yeah.
All right. It's a tough call this year. Second team, especially for me. I'm like, all right. So Ja's
Mm,
obviously here for me. Um,
mm,
his production on a 2 seed was just ridiculous this year. Most post points by anyone in the league actually this year. That's the first time a guard's ever done that. Most points in the paint is a
wow.
guard, Ja Morant. Trae Young, I'm going with though for the other guard spot. Just
Okay.
silly numbers this year. And again, like this isn't most valuable. This is just production. He
Right.
almost led the league in scoring and assists. Now he fell a little short of Chris
Mm,
Paul for the assists.
mm,
KD, got to put him in there. Missed a lot of games, but he would have been first team if he didn't get hurt. He's definitely second
mm,
team in my mind. DeMar, very complete season. I've seen him on second and third teams. I think he's still close strong enough to be a second team just as a scorer
mm.
and facilitator there for Chicago. And then Embiid, like it looks
Right.
crazy because he was a top 3 player this year, but I'm
Mhm,
keeping him at center and I'm keeping him on the second team. And that
right.
like I ended up snubbing Steph pretty far down the line here just because of what Young
Wow.
did this year. Was Steph or Trae Young
Wow.
better player this year?
What you said was Steph or Trae Young the better player?
Yeah.
Which one of them? I think Steph was the better player overall.
All right. It's close. They both shot well this
Yeah,
year.
it is
Steph below
close.
his standards, but still well at 38%. Among the
Mm,
scoring leaders. Missed some games from injury late here, but he obviously carried the Warriors for a lot of that stretch. So I do have him on my third team. With Chris Paul, who missed a lot of time too. Ended up having a phenomenal statistical season there on the 1 seed, though. He needed some recognition.
mm,
Towns, slam dunk is the third team center, I would say. The
mm.
tricky one is the forwards. So our forwards remaining are LeBron, Siakam, and Jimmy Butler. Now, I'm
Going
gonna
Braun.
sh- I'm gonna shoe in Siakam there. More
Mm,
complete season. Missed a little time at the beginning, but James Butler, they both played about 56, 57 games. So I'm not really sure how to split that one up. James had the better statistical season. Butler probably had the more impactful season on a team winning. And like I said, I'm leaning
mm,
with the stats here. LeBron's stats were a little silly, like 30 points a game, 8 rebounds a game, 6 assists, 53% shooting from the field, carrying all the weight out there in LA through other injuries. Um, I got to put LeBron on an All NBA team, and it's tough to snub Butler because his team was a 1 seed. But I'm going with LeBron. I'm going with Siakam there.
that's a good list.
So there's our All NBA. That's the 6 guards, right? Paul. We can debate
Oh yeah,
what
going
team they're
Ja,
on, but Paul, Curry, Ja, Young,
Trey.
Luka, and
Yeah,
Booker.
yeah.
No one left off. I don't think. See what the commenters think.
Someone said you left Giannis off the All NBA team. I thought you added him to the All NBA second. Oh, you put him on the first team,
I put
didn't
him on
you?
the first. You had him second?
Yeah, I put him on the second team.
Well, yeah. All right. So commenters, listen, you had to pick between Embiid, Jokic, and Giannis, like 2 spots effectively on that first team. And you ended up doing 3 guards. But someone's going to get left off that first team. Because again, I don't think the voters are going to vote for enough, forward votes for Embiid to actually have him classified as a forward. And again, you're either doing that for
Mm,
Jokic or you're doing that for Embiid. So both of them are going to get classified as a center. One of them's going to fall the second team, which is crazy, but that's how it's always gone. So we'll have to figure out a solution to that somehow as a league eventually. But this year, it was
right.
obviously a big deal. I'm going to share really quickly before we get out of here my all rookie teams as well as my all defense team.
All right.
All rookie, Cade, Barnes, Mobley. Obviously, those are the rookie of the year candidates. I
Mm,
did go with Franz Wagner of the Magic, who had some ridiculous
interesting.
contributions this year, as well as Josh Giddey, who for a rookie, his 3 stat line there was just ridiculous with the Thunder. I think he's kind of a lock for that spot too. But first team, you also could have looked at Jalen Green, who I had second. Um, Chris Duarte, I was really going back and forth between him and Bones
Mm,
Highland, but Bones' stats weren't as good as I thought they were. So I'm going with Duarte. Io DeSumo, first half was just ridiculous for the Bulls, constant contributor for them. He's a lock for second team in my mind. Herbert Jones, you could put him first because that's how good he was defensively for New Orleans, but I had him second. And Alperen Sengun, if you're going to pick a center, I don't know how you pick anyone but him.
yeah, yeah.
So
His blocks are crazy this season.
yep, passing. Did a ton of stuff for the Rockets there.
Yeah.
2 all-second teams for the Rockets. They had an awful year, but they got their rookies with those 2 picks, Jalen Green,
Yeah.
Sengun, monster second
Hmm.
halves. Hate to leave Bones, and you know who's another good pick here is with the Warriors there. Trying to think of his name. Kaminga. Big
Hmm.
contributions on a winning
Yes.
team. If you want to include him,
Yes.
I wouldn't hate it, but I didn't, just
Yeah.
stat-wise.
Uh, I'll put it into your all rookie second team if I can make an adjustment for your team.
For Duarte,
Yeah, not for Duarte, for Herbert Jones.
Ooh, I gotta have Herb on there. I'm keeping him just the defense. And listen, let's
Uh,
get to all defense.
Fair.
He's an all defensive player for me this season. That's how impactful he was. Second round pick, playing a ton of minutes for New Orleans, taking their biggest assignments. He wasn't my first team. My first team was a lot of the candidates we talked about: Smart, Bridges, Giannis, Rudy, and I did put, just to keep the positional lineup intact a little bit, Jaren Jackson over Bam. Now it got
Right.
trickier on the second team. Went with Drew Holiday, Herbert Jones as the backcourt. Then I kind of stuffed Draymond Green, Bam, and Robert Williams onto that second team, which works. But again, if you want to toss back and forth Bam and Jaren Jackson for that first team, it's a tough comparison. But I leaned with Jackson, who played a lot of forward this year. So there are my awards. There is our preview of the first round series that could be brewing here between the Celtics and Nets. Ajayi Browne will be heading over to Barclays Center pretty soon for this matchup tonight. 7 o'clock, Cavaliers, Nets. Winner moves on to play the Celtics, and we'll have to throw this episode out if Cleveland wins, and the Celtics will be welcoming the Cavs and company. Again, I'm just bracing for it because everybody in the world thinks it's going to be Nets Celtics right now.
Right.
We'll see what happens there. Ajayi Browne, you can catch his coverage of tonight's game at netsdaily.com as well as the Nets Wire on the USA Today network. Appreciate you being here, Ajayi. Great getting to know you a
I
little bit and
appreciate you for
talking
having me.
basketball. And go follow
Yeah,
him
for
at
sure.
Ajayi Browne with an E at the end. AJAYIBROWNE. We'll be tweeting that out from the Dome Theory account. Go get Dome Theory wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes. Ton of new episodes coming out as the playoffs get rolling here. Some topical stuff as well as a lot of Celtics and game stuff going on here. And people were asking, we are going live tonight after the Nets and Cavaliers to talk about whatever the Celtics series is going to be starting Sunday. Game 1, Celtics will host the winner of this game in Boston. Ajayi, be safe out there. Have a great time at the game, and we'll be following along.
Appreciate that, Bobby. Appreciate that. And I'll be tuned in with your Celtics coverage as well.